Now, I will say that as you're taking notes, this is a good opportunity just for a thorough review. And what I'd encourage you to do is to take this chart that we have above us, and the reason I'm doing this is partly because it is so detailed. There's so much to really take into account in your reading. I want to highlight some real basic concepts between the two and be able to make a comparison, because if you can compare them, then it probably says that you understand them far better. So let's start with some of the basic concepts and work our way through the two the different aspects of these. Now, when we talk about, and like I said, write this down. Stop the video right now. Write this down as you're looking at it, and fill it in and see how close you are to being correct as we walk through it. And you could do this, obviously you can look at your book and you can fill it out, because this chart is in your book. But again, one of the ways of mastering concepts and one of the ways of mastering these aspects of this is to be able to review over and over again, and it's to pull it out of your own memory rather than looking at something and repeating it right after. So take a minute, turn the video off, take a minute, and fill this box in, this chart in, and then I will take you through it accordingly. Okay, now let's take each. So in classical conditioning, the basic idea is that the organism associates events. And it's the key. Both of these are associative learning. But in this case, the organism associates events. In operant conditioning, it associates behavior with consequences. Associates behavior and consequences. Okay? So those are the basic differences between the two. The organism is studying the sequence of these events, it associates them and begins to predict them, essentially. In operant conditioning, it associates behavior with certain consequences or resulting events. It operates versus, and we'll just put that up here, okay? We've got responds in this case, and we've got operates on this case. So it is operating on its environment and watching essentially what happens. Now, in terms of response, most of the time this is involuntary. Remember, salivating, an eye blink, involuntary, and it's automatic, auto. In operant conditioning, it's voluntary, so the organism doesn't have to respond, and it's voluntary and it's operating. And we've already put that up there, but I'll put it here again. So it's operating on environment. On environ. Okay. So how does it acquire the behavior? That's what acquisition means here, is how does it go about acquiring the behavior? It associates events. Associates events. And the neutral stimulus is paired with the unconditioned stimulus. So the neutral stimulus, let me find my pointer here, NS is associated with UCR, or UCS. That was the phraseology I used. And eventually becomes the conditioned stimulus. that then leads to what? A conditioned response. In acquisition in operant conditioning, it associates a response with a consequence. Response with consequence. And as you watch me write some of this stuff, granted my handwriting isn't the greatest in the world, but there are some shorthand things that you might be able to use in your note-taking that will streamline some of your note-taking. I'm not recommending how I write, but there are some things that make it easier to take some notes. So what happens? How do we extinguish a behavior? In this case, the CR, so the conditioned response, decreases when, so it decreases when the CS is repeatedly presented with no stimulus. So it decreases CS alone over time. And so it loses that connection. In operant conditioning, the response decreases, and I'll just do decreases, when reinforcement stops, essentially. There's no further reinforcement. Does spontaneous recovery occur? In classical conditioning, this is a far more profound happening, but there is a reappearance, and that's what spontaneous recovery means. Is there's a reappearance of the extinguished CR after a rest period. P with a line over it means after. I'll put it here so it's easier to see. After a rest period. So it will reemerge after a rest period. Initially, if there is no connection like there was before, then it will fall out as well. In operant conditioning, we're talking about the reappearance of an extinguished response. Of extinguished response. And that happens in both of these. It's probably more dramatic in a lot of ways within classical conditioning itself. How about generalization? Remember what generalization is. Generalization is when the response broadens to like stimuli, or like stimuli. So we made the mention of it broadens to similar or like stimuli. And generalization occurs all the time. You look at a steering wheel, whether it's 4 inches across or whether it's a regular size steering wheel, you still would call that a steering wheel. So it's essentially what we're talking about here in generalization is the tendency to respond to stimuli similar to the conditioned stimulus. So response to stimuli similar to CS. I'm running out of space. Generalization the same way is also the same way in operant conditioning. The response is to similar stimuli is also reinforced. And then there's also the notion of discrimination, where there is a distinction made between the CS, CS and something that is not, and the things that are not CS, okay? And there's a distinction made between those. Again, that is very similar, and that operates also in operant conditioning as well, okay? Now, the question is, how'd you do? All of these concepts, all the concepts here are similar across operant to classical. They are applied slightly differently because one depends on the organism's response, the other depends on the association of events. And those are key concepts to understand when we're talking about that. In classical conditioning, the organism learns associations between two stimuli, and the behavior, let me do it this way, classical, and I know I'm repeating this a lot, it's key to understand when we're talking about learning, because we're going to go into memory and we're going to go into other areas that are equally as important, and they use all of these same concepts, okay? So classical is respondent, the behavior itself, it responds to the two stimuli. In operant, the organism learns associations between behavior and resulting events, and in operant, which is a little bit easier to remember, is that essentially the organism is operating on its environment, making things happen, and being reinforced accordingly, okay? And those are the key concepts and the important concepts when we move forward into other aspects of learning. They're key for you to understand them, and that's why I keep repeating them over and over again. Okay. Now, for your brief entertainment, at the end of this video, I will show you a demonstration of, and you can decide what exactly it is. Is it classical conditioning? Or is it operant? And you can decide. It is entertaining. It may be a video that you've seen before, but I will add it at the end for just my way of reinforcing you getting all the way through all of these videos related to operant conditioning.
Oh, damn, lost another file. Gonna have to reboot again. Hey, Dwight, do you want an Altoid?
What do you think?
In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So for the past couple weeks, I've been conducting a similar experiment. Dwight, want an Altoid?
Okay.
Altoid?
Sure.
And Dwight?
Been pretty? Yes.
What are you doing? What?
I don't know. Well, my mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
Well,